In 1974, a yellow Chevrolet Nova was found abandoned near a Texas river, its keys still in the ignition, an unopened Coca-Cola on the passenger seat. The 19-year-old girl who drove it had vanished without a trace. Police concluded she left voluntarily. The case was closed and forgotten. But 48 years later, when a cold case detective examined a faded Polaroid from the original investigation, he noticed something in the background that had been overlooked for nearly half a century. A detail so small, yet so damning, it would finally reveal what really happened that August night and expose the man who had hidden in plain sight all along, even joining the search party to find the girl he made disappear. Before we dive into this haunting story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by cases solved after decades of silence, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from 72-Hour True Crime. This is a story that proves the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. Waco, Texas. August 1974. The night air hung thick with heat and humidity. Winds from the Bosque River carried the scent of mud and damp wild grass. On a small street leading out of downtown, scattered yellow streetlights illuminated long-closed shops. The temperature had barely dropped from the scorching 100-degree afternoon, and the air felt like breathing through wet cotton. Anna Caldwell, 19 years old, finished her last shift of the day at Bright Stitch Tailor Shop. She had been working there for nearly 8 months, saving money for college courses at the local community center. She was a quiet girl, well-liked by everyone who knew her. Her coworkers would later describe her as responsible, kind, and utterly dependable. She carefully folded her uniform into a cloth bag and said goodbye to the manager, Harriet Cooper, mentioning she was looking forward to dinner with her mother. It was a Monday evening, and Mondays meant meatloaf and apple pie at the Caldwell home. She walked to the parking lot where her pale yellow Chevrolet Nova sat under a dim streetlight. The car was her pride and joy, a gift from her late father who had passed away 2 years earlier from a heart attack. She kept it immaculately clean, the interior smelling faintly of the lavender air freshener she bought from the general store every month. The engine rumbled softly as she turned the key, and the car rolled toward the suburbs, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A worker at the Gulf station, a young man named Carl Benson who worked the evening shift, recalled seeing her stop there around 10 minutes to 8. He remembered her buying a cold Coca-Cola from the vending machine outside, smiling as she mentioned heading home for dinner with her mother. Carl would later tell police that she seemed happy, relaxed, completely at ease. There was nothing in her demeanor that suggested fear or distress. She paid with exact change, tucked the cold can into her cloth bag, and walked back to her car. But Carl also remembered something else. Something that would haunt him for years afterward. As Anna stood by her car, keys in hand, there was a man standing near the payphone at the edge of the lot. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark blue shirt with what looked like white paint stains on the collar. Carl didn't think much of it at the time. People stopped at gas stations all the time, made calls, bought cigarettes, used the restroom. It was normal. But what he remembered most clearly was the way Anna looked at the man. She didn't seem frightened. In fact, she smiled. A small smile, the kind you give to someone you recognize. Someone you trust. Carl went back inside to help another customer, and when he came back out a few minutes later, both Anna and the man were gone. The yellow Nova had disappeared down the road toward Highway 84, its taillights fading into the darkness. After that, no one saw Anna Caldwell again. When the clock in the Caldwell home neared midnight, the small kitchen remained lit. The dinner on the table had gone cold, the meatloaf congealing in its pan, the apple pie untouched. Ruth Caldwell stared at the wall clock, its second hand ticking steadily, and realized with growing dread that her daughter hadn't come home. This wasn't like Anna. Anna always called if she was going to be late. Always. Ruth stepped onto the porch, calling her daughter's name into the darkness, her voice cracking with worry. She heard only the hum of cicadas under the trees and the distant sound of a dog barking. The humid night air pressed against her skin like a heavy blanket. Unease flooded the silent house, settling into her bones with a cold certainty that something was terribly, terribly wrong. By morning, Anna's bed remained untouched, the cover still perfectly made, her shoes still neatly placed under the dresser. Ruth had stayed up all night, sitting by the window, watching the dirt road, praying to see headlights appear through the darkness. But they never came. At 12 minutes past 5 in the morning, unable to wait any longer, unable to contain the panic that had been building in her chest all night, Ruth picked up the phone and dialed the Bell County Sheriff's Office with trembling hands. "My daughter didn't come home last night," she said, her voice catching between uneven breaths. "I'm afraid something's happened. She would never do this. She would never just not come home." On the other end, the night shift officer heard her ragged breathing, then the stifled sobs caught in her throat. He could hear the terror in her voice, the desperation of a mother who knew, deep in her soul, that her child was in danger. That call was logged at 5:12 a.m., marking the start of a disappearance that Waco would talk about for nearly half a century. A case that would haunt every investigator who touched it. A mystery that would remain unsolved for 48 years, waiting for the right person to look at it with fresh eyes and finally see what everyone else had missed. As dawn barely broke through the gray mist that morning, Sheriff Wallace Ford left his bed before his alarm even rang. He'd been awakened by the call from dispatch, the urgency in the officer's voice pulling him immediately from sleep. Coffee still hot in his thermos, he drove straight to the Caldwell home, the roads nearly empty in the early morning light. He'd been with the Bell County Sheriff's Office for 16 years, and he'd worked his share of missing person cases. Most of them ended with teenagers who'd run away from home, couples who'd had a fight and needed space, adults who'd simply decided to start over somewhere new. But something about the mother's voice on the phone, the way the dispatcher had described her terror, made him drive a little faster than usual. The small house at the end of a dirt road sat silently amid a cracked, dry garden, its front door slightly ajar. The property was modest but well-maintained, a testament to Ruth Caldwell's determination to keep her late husband's home exactly as he would have wanted it. Ruth Caldwell sat in the living room, a photo of her daughter before her on the coffee table. It was Anna's graduation photo from the previous year, taken outside the high school on a bright spring day. Anna smiled in the picture, her wavy brown hair catching the sunlight, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. She looked so young, so full of hope and possibility. Ruth no longer cried. She had exhausted her tears during the long, dark hours of the night. She only looked up as Ford entered, her eyes red and swollen, her voice rough from crying. "She never left without telling me," Ruth said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not once in her entire life. Even when she was a little girl. She always told me where she was going, when she'd be back. Always." Ford nodded, his weary eyes seasoned by years on the job, betraying a trace of sympathy. He could see the fear and anguish written across Ruth's face, the way her hands trembled as she held her daughter's photograph. He sat down across from her and asked detailed questions about Anna's routine, her car, her clothes, what she'd been wearing that night. He asked about boyfriends, friends, anyone Anna might have confided in, anywhere she might have gone. Ruth answered every question, her voice growing stronger as she talked, as if speaking about her daughter kept her connected to her somehow. Anna had been wearing a floral dress that night, Ruth said, with a denim jacket because the evenings could get cool by the river. She'd taken her cloth work bag with her uniform inside. She drove a yellow Chevrolet Nova, license plate number written on a scrap of paper that Ruth handed to Ford with shaking hands. Anna didn't have a boyfriend currently. She dated a boy named Mark Ridley for a few months the previous year, but they'd broken up amicably. Anna had lots of friends from church, from work, from the neighborhood, but none of them would have asked her to stay out all night without calling home. Ford borrowed the graduation photo, promising Ruth he would do everything in his power to find her daughter. He tucked the photo into an envelope, along with his notes, and headed back to the station as the sun began to climb higher in the sky, burning off the morning mist and revealing another scorching August day. By sunrise, Ford was back at the station, immediately assembling a rapid response team. He called in 5 officers, 2 firefighters from the local volunteer fire department, and put out a call for town volunteers. Within an hour, he had more than 20 people gathered in the conference room. A map of Waco and the surrounding area sprawled across his desk, and Ford began marking key locations with red pins. The Gulf Station where Anna had last been seen. Waco Baptist Church where she volunteered every Sunday. Highway 84, the main route from town to the residential areas. And the Bosque Bridge, which crossed the Bosque River about 5 miles outside of town. "Start the search routes at dawn," Ford instructed, his voice low and steady, but everyone in the room could sense the tension beneath his calm demeanor. "Cover every mile. Check every business, every side road, every turnoff. If anyone remembers seeing a yellow Nova last night, I want to know about it immediately." The first team left the station at 15 minutes past 7 in the morning. Sirens echoed through the humid, heavy air as they made their way along Highway 84. Cracked fields stretched endlessly on either side of the road, the smell of earth and scorched grass seeping into the patrol cars even with the windows rolled up. The heat was already oppressive, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. Ford drove the department's old Plymouth himself, with Sergeant Wayne Porter riding shotgun. They stopped at every roadside store, every gas station, every diner along the highway, asking questions, showing Anna's graduation photo, trying to piece together her movements from the night before. A convenience store clerk about 3 miles out of town confirmed no one matching Anna's description had stopped there. The owner of a small diner said he'd closed at 7 the previous night and hadn't seen anything unusual. But at the Gulf Station, the night shift worker, Carl Benson, remembered clearly. He was still there, having worked a double shift because the morning guy had called in sick. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but his memory was sharp. "A brown-haired girl in a floral dress buying a Coca-Cola around 8 o'clock, Carl said, nodding as he looked at Anna's photo. "Yeah, that's her. I remember her saying she was heading home for dinner. She seemed happy, you know?" "Normal." Ford leaned forward. "Did you see her leave?" Carl nodded. "Yeah, she walked back to her car. But there was something else." He paused, rubbing his tired eyes. "There was a man standing by her car in the lot. Tall guy, wearing a blue shirt. I didn't hear them talk, but I saw her smile at him. Like she knew him, you know?" Then they both headed toward the bridge direction. Ford didn't respond immediately. He only jotted it down in his notebook, his handwriting slightly shaky. This was the first real lead. A man. Someone Anna seemed to know. Someone she trusted enough to smile at. Ford underlined the words, blue shirt, and toward bridge twice. "Did you get a look at his face?" Ford asked. Carl shook his head. "Not really. The lighting out there isn't great, and I was behind the counter. I just remember he was tall, dark-haired, and he had paint or something white on his collar. I figured he was a painter or a handyman, you know? Maybe someone from the church doing repairs or something." By noon, search teams had expanded their range, focusing on the area around Waco Baptist Church and the road leading to the Bosque Bridge. Dogs were released along the riverbank, their handlers guiding them through the thick brush and rocky terrain. Nets were cast over the water under the scorching, near 100-degree heat. Sweat-soaked men combed through every patch of grass and rocky bank, calling Anna's name, hoping to hear a response, finding nothing but silence. Ford stood on a slope overlooking the river, gazing down at the murky water flowing slowly below. His hand tightened around a cigarette, eyes fixed on the scene. The river was deceptive. It looked calm on the surface, but Ford knew there were strong currents beneath, deep pools where things could sink and never be found. The thought made his stomach turn. He'd seen drowning victims before, bodies pulled from this very river, bloated and unrecognizable after just a few days in the water. He pushed the image from his mind and focused on the task at hand. Around 3 in the afternoon, Ford gathered the team at a makeshift command post near the bridge. The eastern and southern routes had turned up nothing except some faint tire tracks on wet soil near the riverbank, but they were impossible to identify with any certainty. As reports were compiled and volunteers checked in, Sergeant Porter walked in holding his notebook, his expression grim. "2 farmers said they saw a yellow car's light stop near the bridge last night," he said quietly, pointing to a spot on the map. "They were heading home from checking their cattle, probably around 8:30 or so. They thought someone was fishing or parking, so they didn't pay much attention. The lights went out after a few minutes, and they kept driving." Ford stayed silent, staring out the window where the sunset was beginning to turn the river red. The timing matched. If Anna had left the Gulf station around 8, she could have reached the bridge by 8:15 or 8:20. And if someone was with her, someone who knew the area, someone who knew the isolated spots along the river. "We'll expand the search that way," Ford said softly, his voice trailing like the river's flow. "If the car stopped at Bosque, that's where it started." He ordered the firefighters to prepare floodlights and small boats for overnight work. He had a bad feeling about this, a feeling that was growing stronger with every passing hour. Anna Caldwell wasn't off having an adventure. She wasn't visiting a friend who lived out of town. Something had happened to her near that bridge, and Ford was determined to find out what. As the sun set that evening, faint yellow beams from the floodlights began sweeping across the water. The search continued into the night, flashlights bobbing along the riverbank like fireflies, voices calling out Anna's name over and over until they grew hoarse. In the thick darkness, everyone shared the same heavy feeling. They weren't searching for a lost person anymore. They were searching for evidence. They were tracing something that had vanished forever into that river night, swallowed by the darkness and the silence. On the second morning of the search, Waco's sky was overcast with dull gray clouds, heavy with humidity that made breathing feel like a chore. The Bosque River's murky water turned slowly, indifferent to the drama unfolding on its banks. The wind carried the sour smell of mud and burnt grass, a smell that would forever be associated with this case in the minds of everyone who worked it. The search team left the command post early, pickup trucks carrying men and dogs filing down the dirt road toward the bridge in a somber convoy. Sheriff Wallace Ford sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, clutching a crumpled map marked with red circles indicating areas already searched. He stared silently through the fogged window, his deep-set, shadowed eyes betraying 2 sleepless nights. He'd gone home the previous evening just long enough to shower and change clothes, grabbing maybe an hour of restless sleep on his couch before the phone rang again, pulling him back to the station. His wife had looked at him with concern, knowing better than to ask questions, knowing he wouldn't stop until he found answers. At around 15 minutes past 7 in the morning, a firefighter leading the group signaled suddenly for everyone to stop. At a turn about 200 yards from the Bosque Bridge, partially hidden under low-hanging tree branches, something glinted faintly in the early morning light. Ford stepped out of the vehicle immediately, mud clinging to his pant legs as he walked toward the source of the reflection. His eyes followed a flash of pale yellow metal through the morning mist, and his heart began to pound. As they approached, a familiar shape emerged from the shadows. The yellow Chevrolet Nova, parked askew off the road, its rear wheels sunk into wet soil as if someone had tried to drive it further but given up. The driver's door was slightly ajar, the window half down, keys still in the ignition. No engine sound. No signs of recent activity. Just a thick, oppressive silence, as if the car had been sitting there for ages, abandoned and forgotten. Ford signaled immediately for the officers to fan out and secure the area. This was now a potential crime scene, and he didn't want anyone contaminating evidence. He approached the vehicle slowly, carefully, his eyes scanning every detail. He peered through the driver's side window, his breath catching in his throat. On the passenger seat, an old floral cloth bag lay open, its contents spilled slightly. Inside, Ford could see a wallet, some loose change, a small notebook, and an unopened Coca-Cola can. The same can Anna had bought at the Gulf station the night before last. The driver's seat was pushed back further than it should have been for someone of Anna's height. She was only about 5 feet 4 inches tall, but the seat was positioned as if someone much taller had been sitting there. The steering wheel was turned slightly to the left, frozen in mid-turn. Ford reached out carefully and touched the hood of the car. Stone cold. The engine hadn't been running for many hours, possibly since the night Anna disappeared. He opened the door slowly, and the smell of gas and damp fabric wafted out, mixed with something else, something faintly sweet that he couldn't quite identify. No blood. No signs of a struggle. No torn fabric or broken glass. Just a thin layer of dust on the gear's shift and wet mud caked on the floor mats, typical of the Bosque area. "Looks like she stopped willingly," Sergeant Porter said, standing beside Ford and scanning the surroundings. A few black crows sat perched on nearby power lines, watching the scene below with dark, unblinking eyes. Ford didn't answer immediately. He stepped carefully to the rear of the car, his eyes scanning the ground. Footprints mixed in the mud, overlapping and hard to identify with any certainty, but he noticed at least two distinct types. One set was small, possibly female, with a pattern consistent with women's casual shoes. The other was larger, clearly male, with thick horizontal treads and a rounded toe. Size 10, maybe 10.5. He signaled for photos immediately. Jerry Maynard, the youngest officer on the force at just 23 years old, pulled out the department's Polaroid camera. It was the only camera they had for crime scene documentation. He began snapping shots, the images emerging wet with ink, slowly developing in the humid air. Ford took each photo as it emerged, holding them carefully by the edges, his eyes never leaving the car. No signs of a struggle, no blood, her bag still here. Porter muttered, voicing what everyone was thinking. What do you think? Ford sighed deeply, flicking ash from his cigarette to the ground. Maybe she left with someone, or was lured away. His voice was soft, tinged with doubt. But even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. Something felt wrong about this scene. The positioning of the car, the way it was hidden just off the road, the unlocked door with the keys still inside. This wasn't someone parking to meet a friend. This was someone who'd been interrupted, someone who'd left in a hurry, or someone who'd been forced to leave. The team spent nearly an hour combing the immediate area. They found a crumpled tissue caught in a bush about 10 feet from the car, some rusty old cans that had probably been there for months, and tire tracks that overlapped older marks, making them impossible to analyze properly. The tracks could have been from a truck or a sedan. Without proper equipment, there was no way to tell. The search dog, a German shepherd named Rex, sniffed along the riverbank, his handler following closely. The dog seemed to pick up a scent near the water's edge, but lost it quickly where the current ran fastest, suggesting that whatever he was tracking had either entered the water or been carried away by the river. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat began to press down on them like a physical weight. The temperature was already in the high 80s, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock yet. Ford called off the morning search, deciding it was too hot to continue safely. He ordered the car to be towed carefully to the station for further inspection, making sure to document its exact position before it was moved. On the drive back, Ford sat in the passenger seat holding a Polaroid of the Nova tilted on the grassy shoulder, its door hanging open like a wound. His eyes were fixed on the image, studying every detail, looking for something he might have missed. The photo was grainy, the lighting poor, but he could make out the basic scene. The yellow car. The mud. The trees. The river in the background. "Don't let anyone near the scene until I'm back," he told Porter firmly. "I want to bring a technician out here, see if we can lift any prints from the door handles, maybe get better photos in daylight." But by the time Ford returned that afternoon with the technician borrowed from the county office in Temple, the scene had been completely compromised. The area was trampled by curious onlookers who had heard about the discovery on their police scanners or from neighbors who'd seen the search teams. Local kids had gathered to gawk at the spot where the car had been found. Neighbors said they'd seen the car early that morning when they drove past and had stopped to look, not realizing they were contaminating a potential crime scene. Fire truck tire marks, dozens of footprints, and churned mud had destroyed any chance of collecting useful evidence. Ford stood silently for a long moment, the afternoon sun glinting off sweat on his forehead. He felt a wave of frustration and anger wash over him, but he kept his expression neutral. He knew he'd lost the first and possibly only chance at real evidence. Without proper training, without proper equipment, without the budget to secure a scene properly, this is what happened. Evidence got destroyed. Cases went cold. Justice slipped away. "Tow the car to the station," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "We'll examine it there." The yellow Nova was hooked up to the tow truck, its rear wheels creaking as they were lifted off the ground, leaving 2 long drag marks in the dirt road. As the convoy left the scene, Ford took one last look at the Bosque River. It remained silent and indifferent, flowing steadily as it had for thousands of years, keeping whatever secrets it held locked beneath its murky surface. For a moment, Ford glanced back at the towed car's windshield as the sunset began to reflect off it, making it flash one last time before fading into the Texas red dust. No one spoke on the way back to town. Ford clutched the mud-stained Polaroid, flipping it over in his hands repeatedly, his mind heavy with the feeling he wasn't ready to name out loud. The sense that this wasn't about someone running away. This was something darker. And somewhere along that silent river, something was waiting to be found. Something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the garage behind Bell County Station, the yellow Chevrolet Nova sat under an old canvas tarp, its wheels still caked with red mud from the Bosque riverbank. The smell of metal, gasoline, and damp earth hung heavy in the stale air. Wallace Ford leaned against the concrete wall, holding a cup of cold coffee that he'd forgotten to drink, staring at the car as if it might suddenly speak and tell him where Anna Caldwell had gone. 3 days had passed since its discovery by the Bosque, and still no trace of the girl. No body had been found in the river despite extensive searches. No witnesses had come forward with new information. No ransom note had arrived. Anna Caldwell had simply vanished, leaving behind only this yellow car and more questions than answers. Dawn crept in slowly, faint sunlight filtering through the dusty garage windows, brushing across the pale yellow car, making it gleam like a forgotten relic in a museum of unsolved mysteries. 2 department technicians, Jerry Maynard and Sergeant Porter, began the examination. They had no modern forensic laboratory at their disposal. No DNA testing. No fingerprint database. No chemical analysis equipment. Just a Polaroid camera, some plastic evidence bags that Porter had brought from home, and an old spiral notebook for recording observations. "Photograph every angle," Ford said, his voice low and clipped. "Document everything. I want a complete record of this vehicle." Jerry nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He began snapping shots methodically, the Polaroid images emerging blurry, streaked with sunlight and shadows cast by the mud. He photographed the front driver's seat, the steering wheel, the front floor mat, then opened the back door to examine the rear of the vehicle. On the ground near the rear wheel, clearly visible in the dried red mud, was a large footprint. It stood out distinctly from the surrounding soil. Deep impression, with thick horizontal treads, rounded toe, approximately size 10. Definitely not a woman's shoe. The pattern looked like a work boot, the kind worn by construction workers or handymen. "Not a woman's shoe," Jerry said, leaning closer to examine it. "This is a man's boot. Size 10, maybe 10.5. Porter glanced over, jotting quickly in his notebook. "Footprint male, size approximately 10. But no one had brought a ruler or proper scale markers. No one had thought to bring equipment for making plaster casts of the prints. They had nothing but their observations and a few scrawled lines in the notebook. Ford stared at the footprint for a long time, his shirt damp with sweat despite the relatively cool temperature in the garage. This was evidence. Real, physical evidence that someone else had been with Anna. Someone who wore men's work boots. Someone who'd been close enough to her car to leave deep impressions in the mud. "Take a mud sample," Ford said finally. "Send it to the Dallas lab. Maybe they can tell us something about the boot pattern, match it to a manufacturer." Porter shrugged apologetically. "Sir, we don't have sample tubes, and this month's transport budget is already gone. The county administrator said no more spending until next quarter unless we have a confirmed homicide." Ford went silent, crushing his cigarette under his heel, his gaze fixed on the footprint. This was the reality of small-town law enforcement in 1970s Texas. Limited funding. Limited resources. Without a body, without definitive proof of a crime, there was no money for forensic analysis. The county wasn't going to spend precious dollars on a case that might just be a runaway teenager. "Then just document it," he said finally, a quiet order that would later mark the first critical crack in the entire investigation. "Photograph it, measure it as best you can, and write down everything you observe." They opened the back door of the vehicle, shining a flashlight on the seat cushions and floor. Dried mud was caked in patches, mixed with white fabric threads that looked like they might have come from clothing. Porter picked one up carefully, rolling it between his fingers. Could be from her dress, he said. Ruth said Anna was wearing a floral dress that night. This looks like it might match. Bag it, Ford ordered. But Porter had no proper evidence bags. The plastic bags he'd brought from home were sandwich bags, hardly suitable for preserving potential evidence. He wrapped the thread carefully in a scrap of notepaper, tucking it into his shirt pocket, hoping he wouldn't lose it. Checking the front floor, they found faint scratches on the dashboard, possibly from fingernails, as if someone had gripped the dashboard tightly. But no one thought to take close-up photographs. The Polaroid camera had only 2 shots left, and Jerry was saving them for what he considered more important images. Jerry used the last Polaroid film on photographing the undercarriage of the vehicle, where thick bosque mud still clung to the frame, reeking of earth and rust. The image came out dark and nearly useless, but it was the best they could do with the equipment they had. By mid-afternoon, Ford made the decision to order the car sealed and kept in storage pending further investigation. "Keep it in the garage for now, pending further orders," he said. "Maybe we'll get funding next month to do a proper forensic examination." But no one ever came to re-examine it. The car sat in the garage for 2 days, covered with its tarp, slowly being forgotten as other cases demanded attention. A domestic violence call. A robbery at the hardware store. A drunk driving accident on the interstate. Life went on, and the yellow Nova became just another piece of evidence waiting for resources that would never come. 2 days later, Ruth Caldwell called the station, her voice trembling with emotion. "I heard you found her car. Can I see it? Please. I need to see it. I need to feel close to her somehow." Ford paused, understanding a mother's need but also knowing it was evidence. But what was he preserving it for? There was no active investigation anymore. The search had been called off. No new leads had emerged. Finally, he agreed. The next morning, Ruth arrived at the station with her nephew, a quiet young man in his early 20s who looked uncomfortable and out of place. Ruth approached the garage slowly, as if afraid of what she might find. She placed a trembling hand on the hood of the Nova, her sunken eyes peering through the dusty glass at the interior. The rearview mirror reflected her haggard face, lined with sleepless nights and endless tears. She stared at the empty interior, at the seat where her daughter had sat just days before, at the unopened Coca-Cola can that Anna would never drink. She said nothing for a long time, only nodded slightly as tears fell silently down her weathered cheeks. After a few minutes she turned and walked away without speaking, her nephew guiding her gently by the elbow. Ford watched her go, his heart heavy. After she left, Ford made a decision he would regret for the rest of his career. He ordered the car released to the family. "No reason to hold it," he told Porter, his voice slow and resigned. "We've documented what we could. We don't have storage space for it indefinitely, and the family needs closure." Porter hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, the footprint, the mud samples, the threads, shouldn't we?" Ford cut him off, his frustration finally showing. "We've got nowhere to store it properly, and Dallas won't take samples without an active criminal case. Without a body, without proof of foul play, this is just a missing person case. The county won't fund anything more." It was the 3rd afternoon since the car's discovery. Ford typed up a brief report for the file, noting simply, "Vehicle returned to owner. No evidence of foul play discovered upon examination." The yellow Nova was towed from the garage that evening. As it was moved, dried mud began flaking off the undercarriage, scattering onto the pavement like pieces of evidence literally slipping through their fingers. When the car reached the Caldwell property, Ruth stood in the yard waiting, the wind tugging at her hair, her eyes hollow and distant as she watched the car her daughter once drove being delivered like a coffin. She didn't dare open the door herself. She couldn't bear to sit in the seat where Anna had sat. She asked a neighbor to cover it with a tarp and lock it in the garage behind the house. There it would sit, untouched, for years to come, a silent monument to a daughter who never came home. That evening in the Bell County office, Ford sat alone at his desk long after everyone else had gone home. The Polaroids were lined up on the scarred wooden surface, a chronological record of failure. Every image was blurry, poorly lit, with key details lost in shadows and overexposure. The footprint photo was nearly indecipherable, just a faint black smudge that could have been anything. Without proper lighting, without proper technique, the photos were almost worthless as evidence. Ford picked up his pen, writing a brief report in his careful, slanted handwriting. No sign of struggle evident. No blood or tissue found. Personal effects remain in vehicle. Possible voluntary disappearance. No evidence of foul play at this time. He set the pen down, rubbing his tired eyes. Outside his window, crickets chirped monotonously like a clock ticking away the hours, marking the slow passage of time and the fading of justice. 3 days later, Anna Caldwell's Nova, the case's only significant physical evidence, was back with her family, beyond the reach of forensic examination, beyond the possibility of future testing. In Bell County's evidence locker, all that remained were a few blurry photos that showed almost nothing, a loose note about a footprint with no measurements, and a piece of thread wrapped in paper. The dried smell of bosque mud lingered faintly in the garage for a few days before fading away completely. No one in that room, no one working the case, knew that the most critical pieces of evidence had been right before them, examined and documented but not preserved, brushed away like dust off a table. Lightly, carelessly, and gone forever. It was a mistake that would echo through decades, a failure that would deny Anna Caldwell justice for nearly half a century. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. This case is about to take an even darker turn, and what happens next will reveal just how close investigators came to catching a killer, only to let him slip through their fingers. On the 4th day after the car's discovery, Wallace Ford began conducting formal interviews with potential witnesses. He sat in a small interrogation room behind the Bell County station, its walls stained yellow from years of cigarette smoke, the ceiling fan creaking like a countdown to nowhere. On the desk lay the Polaroids of the yellow Chevrolet Nova, a few typed reports, and a witness list scribbled in pencil on a legal pad. Ford rubbed his bloodshot eyes, sipped bitter lukewarm coffee from a stained mug, and signaled to Porter to bring in the first person on the list. The man who walked in was Carl Benson, the night shift worker at the Gulf station who'd been the last confirmed person to see Anna Caldwell alive. He was young, probably mid-20s, his hair slick with sweat despite the early hour, his work shirt stained with the perpetual smell of motor oil and gasoline. Ford observed his demeanor closely as he asked Carl to revisit the details from his previous informal statement. "When did she stop by the station?" "Around 10 minutes to 8, sir," Carl replied, his voice nervous but steady. "Maybe closer to 8. I remember because I'd just finished restocking the cigarette display." "Was she alone?" "Yes, sir. When she first pulled up, she was alone in the car. But when she stepped out to use the Coca-Cola machine, there was a man standing near the payphone. I thought they knew each other because of how she reacted to him." Ford leaned forward, his interest sharpening. "Did you get a good look at his face? Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" Carl shook his head slowly, his lips slightly pursed. "I just remember he was tall, definitely over 6 feet. Dark hair, looked like it might have been graying a bit at the temples. He was wearing a navy blue shirt with white paint on the collar, like he'd been doing painting work, or something. I didn't think much of it at the time, you know. People stop at gas stations all the time. Did you hear them say anything to each other?" "No, sir," Carl said, shaking his head. "I was behind the counter, and they were out by the pumps. I just saw her give him a small smile, like she was reassuring someone or saying hello to someone she recognized. Then I went to help another customer, and when I looked out again a few minutes later they were both gone." Ford stayed silent, writing slowly and deliberately in his notebook. "Male, tall, over 6 feet, dark hair possibly graying, blue shirt with paint stains, seen at gas station approximately 1950 hours." Before Carl left, Ford asked one more question, his voice casual but his eyes intent. "This smile you mentioned. Did it look like she was happy to see him? Or more like a polite smile, the kind you give a stranger?" Carl thought for a moment. "Somewhere in between, I guess. Like someone you know from church or work but aren't necessarily friends with. You know what I mean? Polite but genuine." That afternoon, Ford and Porter visited Bright Stitch, the tailor shop where Anna had worked. The shop was still open for business, sewing machines humming steadily in the back room, the sound of needles clicking rhythmically against fabric. The manager, Harriet Cooper, a middle-aged woman with hands perpetually dusted in thread lint and eyes magnified behind thick glasses, remembered Anna leaving around 20 minutes to 8 that evening. She was wearing her denim jacket over her work dress, Harriet recalled, her voice warm with affection for the missing girl. She folded her uniform so carefully, like she always did. Very meticulous, that girl. She said she'd be home early for dinner with her mom. She even smiled and told me to save her a slice of apple pie for the next day because her mother always made extra. Ford asked about Anna's relationships with coworkers and customers, searching for any hint of conflict or unusual attention. Cooper shook her head firmly. Everyone liked her. She was quiet, respectful, hard-working. No enemies that I know of. No debts. She wasn't dating anyone from the shop. After she and that Ridley boy broke up last spring, she said she wanted to focus on saving money for school. Porter jotted notes in his small pad, glancing briefly at Ford as if checking whether he was thinking something he wasn't saying aloud. Ford's expression remained neutral, professional, but his mind was already working through possibilities. That evening, Ford summoned Anna's ex-boyfriend, Mark Ridley, a 22-year-old senior at Baylor University studying business administration. Mark arrived at the station looking exhausted and emotionally drained, his face pale, hands clasped tightly together, as if in prayer. When Ford questioned him, his voice cracked with emotion. "We broke up 4 months ago," Mark said, his eyes red-rimmed. "It was mutual. No fights, no bad blood. We just realized we wanted different things. She wanted to stay in Waco near her mom. I'm planning to move to Dallas after graduation. We're still friends. We're still friends." He corrected himself, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know anything about this, sir. I swear." Ford asked directly where Mark had been the night Anna disappeared. "I was working at the university library," Mark said immediately. "I had a paper due for my economics class. I was there from about 7 until close to 10:30. One of the librarians, Mrs. Henderson, can confirm it. I talked to her several times that evening." A later check with the university verified Mark's alibi. The librarian remembered him clearly, recalled him asking for help finding reference materials around 9 in the evening. His checkout records showed books borrowed at 9:45, and the security log showed him leaving the building at 10:32. Ford closed his notebook, studying Mark's face for a long moment, looking for any sign of deception. He saw only genuine grief and confusion. "If you remember anything at all that might help, call me directly." Mark nodded, his gaze distant, unfocused, as if he still couldn't process that Anna was truly gone. As he left the station, Ford watched him through the window, noting the slump of his shoulders, the way he wiped at his eyes. That wasn't the demeanor of someone hiding guilt. In the days that followed, the witness list grew longer as Ford cast a wider net. He interviewed Anna's friends from church, her neighbors, her former teachers, anyone who might have information. But amid all the scattered testimonies, one name kept resurfacing with increasing frequency. Pastor Raymond Hale, the assistant minister at Waco Baptist Church, who had spoken with Anna several times in the weeks before her disappearance. A friend from the church choir, a young woman named Elizabeth Morden, mentioned that Hale often showed special attention to Anna, praising her singing voice and calling her a pure soul. Another church member, an elderly woman named Agnes Trent, recalled Hale driving past the tailor shop several times, always slowing down as if looking for someone. When Agnes had asked him about it one Sunday after service, Hale had said he was just passing by on his way to visit parishioners and wanted to say hello to Anna if she was working. When Porter brought this information to Ford late one evening, Ford looked up from his desk where he'd been reviewing reports, and fell silent for a long moment. He'd heard that name before in a different context. The same Raymond Hale who had volunteered to join the initial search team. The same man who had, quite conveniently, found a handkerchief embroidered with Anna's initials by the river on the second day of the search. That afternoon, Ford sent word for Hale to come to the station for a formal interview. The pastor arrived precisely on time the next day, wearing a crisp white shirt with the collar buttoned neatly, graying hair combed smooth and neat, clutching a small black leather Bible that looked well worn from use. As he entered the interview room, he offered a faint, almost beatific smile, his eyes calm and untroubled. "Pastor Hale," Ford began, keeping his tone professional and neutral. "Thank you for coming in. We're just trying to clarify a few details about Anna Caldwell's disappearance. I understand you knew her from church?" Hale nodded slowly, his voice low and silky, almost hypnotic in its smoothness. "Yes, she was a good person. A truly good soul. She often helped teach children at Sunday school. I saw her almost like a daughter, you know. So young, so full of faith and kindness." Ford watched every small movement, every blink, every slight gesture of Hale's hands as they rested calmly on the scarred table. "Did you see her the night she disappeared? August 19th? Hale shook his head without hesitation. "No, Sheriff. I was home that evening. I'd finished choir practice at the church around 8, then went straight home. I live alone, so there's no one to confirm it, but that's the truth. I didn't even hear about Anna being missing until the next morning when one of the church members called me. That's when I immediately came to help with the search. It's our duty as Christians to help those in need." Ford pulled a Polaroid photograph of the search team from his file and slid it across the table toward Hale. "That's you in this photo, correct?" Hale looked at the image, a small smile crossing his face. "Yes, that's me. I remember that day clearly. It was heartbreaking, searching for that poor girl. I'm the one who found the handkerchief by the river. When I saw those initials AC, I knew immediately it was hers. I called out to the other searchers right away." "Where exactly did you find it?" Ford asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Right at the river's edge, near where her car had been discovered," Hale said, his eyes meeting Ford's directly, showing no sign of discomfort or evasion. "It was partially hidden under some leaves and grass, but the white fabric caught my eye. It looked like someone had placed it there, almost deliberately, as if they wanted it to be found." Ford nodded, continuing to take notes, but something about the statement nagged at him. The phrasing was odd. Placed there to be found. Not dropped. Not lost. Placed. He underlined the words in his notebook. After the interview concluded and Hale left the station, the afternoon light slanting through the window illuminated the man's face as he paused at the door to shake Ford's hand. Ford watched him walk down the hallway, noting the calm, unhurried pace, the slight smile that never quite left his face. Deputy Tommy Greer, who had been observing the interview through the two-way mirror, came into the room and said quietly, "Something's off about him." Ford turned to him, asking softly, "What do you mean? What did you see that I missed?" Greer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know exactly how to explain it, sir. It's his eyes. They're too calm. Too steady. Like he's hiding something major but believes completely that he's innocent. Or maybe he's convinced himself that whatever he did was justified somehow." The interview report was typed up that evening by the department secretary, concluding with the standard language. "Subject cooperative and forthcoming. No inconsistencies detected in statement. No basis for detention. No corroborating witnesses to contradict subject's account." The case seemed to stall right there. Ford had suspicions, gut feelings, the uneasy sense that Hale wasn't telling the complete truth. But suspicions weren't evidence. Gut feelings didn't hold up in court. Without physical proof linking Hale to Anna's disappearance, without witnesses who could place him at the scene, without a body that might show cause of death, there was nothing Ford could do. Outside the station that night, the first rain of the season pattered steadily on the tin roof, a sound that usually brought relief from the Texas heat, but now seemed melancholy and oppressive. In the dim yellow light of his office, Ford sat alone at his desk long after everyone else had gone home. His fingers absently tapped the edge of the Polaroid showing the white handkerchief with its embroidered initials. He didn't say it aloud to anyone, didn't write it in any official report, but a question formed in his mind that night, a question that would haunt him for the rest of his career and follow him into retirement. Why was a volunteer civilian helper at the scene of a disappearance before the police arrived? How had Hale known exactly where to search? And why had no one thought to ask these questions at the time? 3 weeks after conducting the final interview, with no new witnesses coming forward and no solid evidence to pursue, the Caldwell case had made virtually no progress. Ford sent preliminary reports to the state office in Austin every few days, hoping for guidance, hoping for resources, hoping for some kind of support. Each time, he received the same curt reply typed on official letterhead. No new leads identified. Continue monitoring situation. Allocate resources as needed for higher priority cases. Day after day, Ford reread the Warren reports, searching desperately for a gap he might have missed, a small detail that could spark a new lead and breathe life back into the investigation. But everything remained frustratingly silent. Outside his window, Waco moved relentlessly forward as if nothing had happened. Bright Stitch Tailor Shop kept its regular hours, the lights glowing warmly each evening. The Gulf Station stayed open 24 hours, serving the steady stream of travelers on Highway 84. And Waco Baptist Church rang its bells every Sunday morning, calling the faithful to worship, including Pastor Raymond Hale, who continued to lead choir practice and teach Bible study. Only one mother sat alone by her small home's window every evening, staring fixedly at the dirt road where a yellow car used to return punctually each night, bringing her daughter home safely. Ford began feeling increasing pressure from the county administration. Bell County operated on a shoestring budget, and a missing person case with no leads was never going to be a funding priority. At the weekly budget meeting, the administrative chief set the Caldwell file down on the conference table with an audible thud, his voice flat and bureaucratic. 3 weeks, Sheriff. No body recovered. No witnesses coming forward. No signs of a crime having been committed. We can't justify keeping resources dedicated to this indefinitely. We've got actual crimes to investigate. Robberies. Assaults. Drug cases. You understand the position. Ford didn't respond immediately. He stared out the window at the early fall wind scattering dry leaves across the station parking lot, watching them swirl and dance before settling into corners and crevices. Then, with a heavy heart, he pulled the Caldwell file toward him and signed the final summary report. No evidence of foul play. Case classified as voluntary missing person. Those few words, seemingly routine bureaucratic paperwork, marked the official end of the only concentrated effort that might have brought Anna Caldwell home or at least brought her family answers and closure. The next day, the case was officially filed in the records room as missing person, status unknown. The file would remain open technically, meaning if new evidence emerged it could be reopened, but for all practical purposes, the investigation was over. Deputy Greer, who had been assisting with the case since the beginning, asked quietly as Ford prepared to file the reports. Are we really closing it? Just like that? Ford didn't look up from the paperwork he was organizing. We've got nothing substantial to hold on to, Tommy. No evidence of a crime. No body. No crime scene we can process. No budget to continue. You know how this works. You've been here long enough. He said it calmly, with the resignation of someone who'd been in law enforcement long enough to understand the harsh realities of limited resources and political pressures. But his eyes remained fixed on one particular piece of evidence, the Polaroid photograph showing the white handkerchief with AC embroidered in delicate blue thread, and the look on his face suggested he didn't believe his own words. Didn't believe for a moment that Anna Caldwell had simply walked away from her life. That afternoon, Ford personally carried the evidence boxes to the storage room located in the basement behind the station. The small, windowless room was lit by a single dim yellow bulb that cast long shadows across the metal shelving. The air smelled perpetually of old paper, dust, and rusted metal. He placed the 3 remaining pieces of evidence carefully into a cardboard file box. The white handkerchief, wrapped loosely in a plastic bag that was already beginning to yellow. 6 blurry Polaroid photographs that showed the crime scene and search efforts. And an 11-page handwritten report summarizing the investigation in Ford's careful, slanted script. He picked up a red marker and wrote clearly on the box's label. Case number 74, Caldwell, Anna, missing person. As he sealed the box with brown packing tape, he paused for a long moment, staring at the words he'd just written. The red ink seemed to blur slightly in the dim light, as if even the marker was reluctant to commit these words to permanence, to consign this case to the dusty oblivion of cold cases and forgotten victims. That evening, Ford sat alone in his office well past the end of his shift. The door stood slightly ajar, and he could hear the soft patter of rain beginning outside, the first real rain they'd had in weeks. The Caldwell file lay neatly arranged on his desk, not yet stored away in the basement. His mind kept returning obsessively to Pastor Hale, replaying their conversation, analyzing every word, every gesture. He recalled one small detail from Hale's statement that had stuck with him. When asked about finding the handkerchief, Hale had said, "I saw it at the water's edge, like someone had placed it there deliberately to be found." That sentence had kept Ford awake through several long nights. The phrasing was so specific, so certain. How could Hale know it had been placed deliberately unless he was the one who'd placed it? But confronted with that logic, Ford also had to acknowledge it could mean nothing. It could be coincidence, the kind of detail that seems significant only because you're looking for significance. Despite everything his gut was telling him, despite the unease he felt every time he thought about Hale's calm eyes and smooth explanations, Ford could do nothing more. There was no evidence. No probable cause for a search warrant. No legal basis for continuing surveillance. And in the eyes of local authorities and the district attorney's office, the case was simply a young woman who'd chosen to leave home for reasons of her own. On the last day of August, Ford carried the cardboard box labeled Case Number 74 Caldwell down to the basement storage room. He placed it carefully on the third shelf from the floor on the left side of the room, sliding it in among dozens of other boxes. Number 72, a theft case from the previous month. Number 73, a domestic dispute that had been resolved. Number 74, Caldwell. Number 75, a vandalism case at the high school. He brushed a thin layer of dust off the label with his thumb, making sure the case number was clearly visible, then turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at the rows of boxes, file cabinets stuffed with paperwork, and metal shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten investigations. Then he pulled the heavy metal door closed and locked it. The iron lock made a sharp clanging sound that echoed down the empty hallway, final and irrevocable. As he walked back upstairs to the main office, he paused at a window overlooking the parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving only a thin mist drifting lazily past the streetlights. He lit what would be his last cigarette of the day, watching the smoke curl around his gaunt, tired face. That night, sitting alone in his small house on the outskirts of Waco, Ford opened his personal journal, something he'd kept for years to record thoughts and observations that didn't belong in official reports. He wrote one line in his careful handwriting. Caldwell case. No leads. No closure. May God forgive us. The words were short and scrolled across the page, as if even he himself didn't want to fully acknowledge what he was writing, didn't want to admit that they were giving up on finding Anna Caldwell. From that point forward, Anna Caldwell's name vanished almost completely from Bell County official reports and public discussion. The yellow Chevrolet Nova remained in Ruth Caldwell's garage, covered with a tarp, never to be driven again. Waco Baptist Church stopped including prayers for Anna in the Sunday service. The search volunteers returned to their regular lives, the memory of those hot August days by the Bosque River fading like morning mist. Only one thing remained. A cardboard box labeled Number 74 Caldwell. Sitting in the dark storage room, silent and still under a thin layer of accumulating dust. Like an unmarked grave in a cemetery of unanswered questions, it waited in the darkness for someone to remember, for someone to care enough to look again. In the years that followed, Anna Caldwell's name faded from Waco's collective memory like smoke dissipating in a strong wind. After the case was officially closed and filed away, no one in authority asked further questions. No one pushed for continued investigation. Life in a small Texas town moved forward with its own rhythm, and yesterday's tragedies were quickly replaced by today's concerns. In 1975, the Waco Tribune-Herald ran a brief follow-up note on the anniversary of Anna's disappearance. The article was maybe 6 column inches, buried on page 11. Caldwell disappearance 1 year later, no new developments in the case of missing Waco teen. The article mentioned that Anna's family continued to hope for answers but acknowledged that police had no active leads. A week later, that same newspaper space was occupied by a story about a grain warehouse fire in the nearby town of Belton, and Anna Caldwell was never mentioned in print again. From that point forward, no one spoke publicly about the 19-year-old girl who had vanished on a sweltering August night. Her name became a whisper, then less than a whisper. Older residents might occasionally remember her if prompted, but younger people growing up in Waco had never even heard her story. In the county police storage room, the box labeled Number 74 Caldwell sat silently on its iron shelf, gathering dust with each passing year. It was positioned next to older files, cases from the early 70s that had long since been forgotten. New officers who occasionally came down to the basement storage area to file paperwork would sometimes notice the faded label and joke to each other, asking, "Who's Caldwell?" and receiving only shrugs in response. No one working there in the late 70s had any memory of the case. Sheriff Wallace Ford had been transferred to a regional administrative office in 1976, promoted to a desk job coordinating county law enforcement efforts. Deputy Tommy Greer moved to the traffic division, spending his days writing speeding tickets and investigating automobile accidents. The interview room where they'd questioned Pastor Raymond Hale now held only yellowed walls and the musty smell of old paper, any memory of that August investigation completely erased. Around 1978, Ruth Caldwell made the painful decision to sell the small house at the end of the dirt road. The memories had become too much to bear. Every room reminded her of Anna. Every corner held a ghost. She moved to Temple, Texas, to live with relatives who could provide support and companionship during her remaining years. People who knew Ruth said she took her daughter's yellow Chevrolet Nova with her, keeping it carefully tucked in a storage shed behind her relative's property. The car never started again. Its battery died. Its tires rotted. But Ruth couldn't bear to part with it. By 1982, local authorities conducted a sweep of abandoned property across Bell County, seizing vehicles that had been left to deteriorate on private land. The yellow Nova was among dozens of cars hauled away to the county impound lot. Ruth had passed away the previous year, and her relatives saw no reason to maintain a non-functional vehicle that only brought pain. The transfer record, typed on a manual typewriter, noted briefly, "Item number N482, vehicle, 1968 Chevrolet Nova yellow, condition poor, scrapped for parts." The car that had been the last place anyone saw Anna Caldwell alive was crushed in a metal compactor and sold for scrap. With it went any possibility of future forensic examination, any chance that advancing technology might someday extract evidence from its interior. It was as if the last physical connection to Anna had been deliberately erased. No one knows if Wallace Ford ever saw that scrap record. He had retired early from law enforcement in 1984 due to worsening heart issues. Those who knew him said the job had taken its toll, that he carried the weight of unsolved cases like physical burdens on his shoulders. He passed away in February of 1985 at the age of 58, his obituary making no mention of the Caldwell case or any of the investigations he'd worked during his career. By then, truly no one in Bell County remembered the Caldwell case. A new generation of officers staffed the department, working with new technologies and new priorities. The old storage room in the basement remained, but its contents were largely ignored, considered ancient history with no relevance to modern policing. The 1980s passed, and investigative technology began to advance in major cities and well-funded departments. DNA analysis was invented and refined. Fingerprint databases became computerized. Forensic science made enormous leaps forward. But these advances didn't reach small-town Texas, especially not places like Bell County that operated on minimal budgets and outdated equipment. The police still used typewriters well into the late 1980s. Paper files still stacked high in overflowing cabinets. And the basement storage room remained a dark repository of forgotten cases, its shelves sagging under the weight of decades of unsolved crimes and closed investigations. Once, during a particularly heavy rainstorm in 1987, the basement flooded when an old pipe burst. Water rushed in, soaking the lowest shelves and damaging dozens of case files. Papers clumped together into soggy, illegible masses. ink ran and blurred. Photographs stuck together and became ruined. When maintenance workers finally got around to cleaning up the mess several days later, they simply discarded most of the damaged files, keeping only a few boxes that appeared intact enough to salvage. Among those salvaged boxes was number 74, Caldwell. Its tape seal remained intact because it had been stored on a higher shelf, just above the waterline. The red ink on its label had faded over the years to a brownish rust color, but it was still legible if you looked closely enough. The box survived purely by chance, by being stored 18 inches higher than the boxes around it. No one opened it during the cleanup. Perhaps out of bureaucratic laziness, or perhaps because no one working there in 1987 had any idea what the box contained or why it might matter. It was simply placed back on the shelf, now damp and slightly warped but still sealed, and forgotten once again. Occasionally, new trainees at Bell County were assigned the tedious task of cleaning and organizing the storage room as part of their probationary duties. They would spend a few hours down there, moving boxes around, creating the illusion of organization, and complaining about the musty smell and poor lighting. One young trainee in 1989 used a black marker to scrawl a note on the Caldwell box's lid. "Old missing girl case, 1974. That note, too, would fade over time, just like everything else connected to Anna Caldwell. By the late 1980s, America had entered a new era of forensic science that was revolutionizing criminal investigations across the country. DNA evidence was being used to solve cold cases that had been dormant for decades. Computer databases were linking crimes across state lines. Psychological profiling was helping investigators understand criminal behavior patterns. But Bell County, Texas, remained largely stuck in the past. Budget constraints meant that new equipment was rare. The department still relied heavily on manual typewriters. Paper files still dominated storage. And the basement archive was considered little more than a graveyard for old cases that would never be solved, their files maintained only because regulations required retention for a certain number of years. In 1990, as Texas began its first ambitious digital case archiving program, state officials sent directives to county departments across the state, asking them to review old files and determine which cases should be digitized and which could be permanently archived or even destroyed. Many counties took this opportunity to purge decades of paperwork, discarding anything that didn't meet the state's criteria for retention. The number 74 Caldwell box, though intact and in relatively good condition considering its age, was moved during this reorganization to the very lowest shelf of the storage room, in a section reserved specifically for non-criminal missing person cases. The distinction was important. Cases classified as homicides or suspected homicides were given priority for potential digitization. But cases like Anna Caldwell's, officially classified as voluntary missing person, no evidence of foul play, were considered low priority. No one objected to this classification. No one checked the contents of the box to verify whether the classification was appropriate. The box was simply moved, its label updated with a small sticker reading, "Archive Level 3 Minimum Retention," and then forgotten yet again. The box sat in that dark corner of the basement, accumulating a thick layer of dust that grew heavier with each passing year. Its label remained faint but still technically intact if someone looked closely with proper lighting. It became a silent testament to a bureaucratic mistake, to an investigation that had been abandoned too soon, to evidence that had been mishandled and lost. Most of all, it was a testament to a young woman whose disappearance had been deemed unworthy of continued attention. When the storage room's lights were turned off at the end of each workday, the space would sink into complete darkness. The only sounds were the distant hum of old air conditioning units, and the occasional scurry of mice that had made their homes among the forgotten files. Down the hallway, the modern world continued its steady progress, officers working with computers and digital systems, unaware that just beneath their feet lay decades of unsolved mysteries. And in that dark corner, among hundreds of nameless cases, number 74 Caldwell remained completely untouched, unseen, and unremembered. Waiting. Waiting for 48 years. Waiting for someone who cared enough to look. Waiting for someone who would refuse to let Anna Caldwell be forgotten. Waiting for the technology and the determination that would finally bring the truth into the light. March 2022. After nearly half a century buried in the basement of the Bell County Sheriff's Office, the box labeled number 74 Caldwell was finally reopened. The storage room had undergone significant changes over the decades. New iron racks had been installed. Bright white LED lights replaced the dim yellow bulbs. Every box now had a QR code for digital tracking and management. But despite all the modernization, the smell of old paper and damp concrete remained remarkably the same as it had been in 1974. Standing in that room on a Tuesday morning was Aaron Mills, a 42-year-old investigator with the Texas Cold Case Review Unit, a relatively new state-funded project dedicated specifically to revisiting unsolved disappearances using modern forensic techniques. Mills was lean and perpetually quiet, with the intense focus of someone who found meaning in details others overlooked. He had a distinctive habit of always wearing nitrile gloves when handling old files, a practice that had earned him gentle teasing from colleagues but had also saved crucial evidence on more than one occasion. At the project's kickoff meeting the previous month, Mills had given a short speech to the assembled investigators that would become something of a personal motto. "Every old file represents a chance," he'd said. "Not a shadow of failure, but an opportunity. An opportunity to use technology that didn't exist when these cases were fresh. An opportunity to ask questions that weren't asked the first time. An opportunity to give victims and families what they deserved but never received, answers." When the comprehensive list of old missing person cases arrived from various counties across Texas, Mills had carefully reviewed hundreds of names, looking for cases that met specific criteria. Cases old enough that original investigators would likely be retired or deceased. Cases where evidence might still exist despite the passage of time. Cases where the original investigation appeared to have ended prematurely or without adequate explanation. One name caught his attention almost immediately, precisely because almost no one remembered it. Caldwell, Anna. Age 19. Disappeared August 19, 1974. Case classified as voluntary missing person. Evidence box reportedly still in storage. Mills found the box exactly where the database indicated it should be, in the bottom corner of the third shelf from the floor. Its label was so faded he needed to shine his flashlight directly on it to read the scroll text. He carefully lifted the box, noting its surprising lightness, and placed it on the stainless steel examination table he'd brought down from the lab upstairs. The brown packing tape that sealed the box had become brittle with age, cracking and flaking as Mills gently peeled it away. He opened the cardboard flap slowly, almost reverently, knowing that whatever was inside had been untouched for nearly 5 decades. Inside, besides several yellowed handwritten reports bound with a rusted paper clip, were 3 pieces of physical evidence. A white handkerchief, folded carefully and sealed in a plastic bag that had yellowed with age. 6 Polaroid photographs, their colors faded to sepia tones but still viewable. And a small plastic sandwich bag containing what appeared to be a brown hair, approximately 7 centimeters long, still stuck to a clump of dried mud. On the edge of the bag containing the hair, someone had written in ballpoint pen in faded but still legible script. "Found near vehicle, Bosque Bridge area, August 1974. Mills carefully put on his magnifying headset, a specialized piece of equipment with built-in LED illumination, and examined the hair closely. It was thin, consistent with human hair, and appeared to have the follicle still attached, which would be crucial for DNA extraction. There was no visible blood, but the hair itself appeared remarkably well preserved, protected by being sealed in plastic for so many years. He exhaled softly, a sound of amazement and relief. "Still here," he murmured to himself. "After 48 years, it's still here. Unbelievable." He turned his attention to Sheriff Ford's original report, the pages brittle and yellowed but the handwriting still clear. Ford's bold, slanting script covered 11 pages, documenting the search, the discovery of the vehicle, the interviews conducted, and the ultimate conclusion. On the final page, underlined twice, were the words that had officially closed the case. "No evidence of foul play suspected. Case classified as voluntary missing person." Mills reread that line slowly, his lips pursed in concentration. No evidence of foul play? His trained investigator's mind immediately questioned that conclusion. A 19-year-old girl vanishes with her car abandoned by a river, keys in the ignition, her possessions left behind, and the official determination was that she left voluntarily? The logical inconsistency was glaring, at least by modern investigative standards. The question that formed in Mill's mind would linger throughout the entire reinvestigation. How could anyone look at these circumstances and conclude there was no crime? But he also understood the context. 1974. Limited resources. No DNA technology. No computer databases. No modern forensic capabilities. Investigators did the best they could with what they had, even if that best was woefully inadequate by today's standards. That afternoon, Mills carefully transported all the evidence to the Central Processing Laboratory in Austin, a state-of-the-art facility that would have seemed like science fiction to Wallace Ford back in 1974. The lab was equipped with DNA sequencers, mass spectrometers, electron microscopes, and computerized databases that could search millions of genetic profiles in seconds. Technician Laura Chin, a specialist in degraded biological samples, met Mills at the lab's secure entrance. She was in her mid-30s, with the precise movements and careful speech of someone who understood that a single mistake could destroy evidence that had survived for decades. She helped him examine the evidence under a high-powered microscope in the sterile examination room. "Real hair, definitely not fabric or synthetic material," she said, her voice tinged with professional excitement. "And look at this, the follicle is still attached. We can extract DNA if it hasn't degraded too severely. The plastic bag actually helped preserve it by keeping out moisture and bacteria." Mills nodded, watching as Laura carefully removed the hair and placed it in a specialized preservation solution. "What about the handkerchief?" Laura opened the yellowed plastic bag with extreme care, using sterile tweezers to remove the white cloth and spread it on the examination table. One corner of the handkerchief bore the initials AC, embroidered in blue thread, the stitching meticulous but faded after nearly 5 decades. The fabric had yellowed considerably, with some brown staining that could have been dirt, blood, or simply age-related discoloration. She swabbed the handkerchief lightly in several locations, especially around the embroidered initials and along the edges where someone might have gripped it. Each swab was placed carefully in a labeled tube and sealed. "If there's any epithelial residue remaining, any skin cells or other biological material, we might be able to extract DNA. With modern amplification techniques, we can get profiles from incredibly small samples. If we're lucky, we might find male DNA mixed with the victims." Mills smiled, a complex expression mixing excitement, hope, and a sense of disbelief at how far forensic science had advanced. 48 years, he said quietly. 48 years, and the evidence was still intact enough to potentially speak. To tell us what happened that night. Among the Polaroid photographs was one that immediately captured Mills' attention. It showed the initial search team, 4 men standing by the Bosque River on what appeared to be an overcast morning. The sky behind them was gray and heavy. The river was visible in the background. The men stood in a rough line, their postures casual despite the serious nature of their task. One tall figure stood on the far left of the group, wearing a white shirt that seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. His face was captured in that peculiar way old photographs sometimes managed, half illuminated and half shadowed, making his features both visible and mysterious. Beneath the photo, written in faded pencil, was a simple notation. "Volunteer Pastor R.H." Mills jotted a quick note in his investigation log, then carefully scanned the photograph into the digital archive system using a high-resolution scanner that captured far more detail than would be visible to the naked eye. The initials, R.H., immediately piqued his curiosity. He returned to his temporary office in the Bell County building and opened his laptop, accessing the comprehensive parish database maintained by the Texas Conference of Churches. He entered search parameters for pastors who had been active in the Waco area between 1970 and 1980. Within minutes, a name appeared on the screen, accompanied by a brief biographical summary. Reverend Raymond Hale. Waco Baptist Church, assistant pastor from 1969 to 1984. Retired in 1985 at age 37, citing health reasons. relocated to Temple, Texas. The database noted that he had been praised extensively by the community for volunteer work, particularly for assisting in missing persons searches and youth ministry. Passed away. Mills stopped reading and scrolled back. The entry said passed away, but then the date field was blank. He ran a quick cross-reference search through the Texas Vital Statistics database. No death certificate on file for Raymond Hale, born in 1948. His pulse quickened. He expanded the search, checking property records, vehicle registrations, voter records. And there it was. Raymond Hale, age 74, currently residing at 123 Willow Creek Drive, Temple, Texas. Active voter registration. Property taxes paid current. The man was alive. Mills wrote in red pen across his notepad. Hale, present at scene. Still alive. Currently Temple, Texas. That night, working late in his temporary office, Mills opened a new digital case file, typing carefully. Caldwell, Anna. Case reopened March 15, 2022. Cold Case Review Unit Investigation. Under the evidence section, he typed. Evidence recovered from original 1974 investigation. White handkerchief with initials AC embroidered, brown hair with follicle attached, 6 Polaroid photographs including image of search team. DNA testing scheduled for all biological samples. Cross-reference with Cody's database upon completion of genetic profiling. Review background of Raymond Hale, volunteer search participant. 3 days later, all the samples were officially transferred to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Austin, the most advanced forensic facility in the state. As Mills signed the chain of custody transfer form, a young technician who was processing the paperwork looked at the case date and remarked casually, "Wow, another 40-year-old case." Mills looked up, meeting the technician's eyes. 48 years, actually," he said quietly. 48 years. But the girl still hasn't come home." The words seemed to hang in the air, silencing the casual chatter in the room. The technician nodded soberly and handled the evidence containers with noticeably more care. While awaiting the DNA results, Mills began the painstaking process of reviewing every scrap of documentation from the original investigation. He digitized Ford's handwritten reports, transcribing them into searchable text. He studied the Polaroids, using modern image enhancement software to pull out details that would have been invisible in 1974. He created a detailed timeline, mapping every known movement and event. In Ford's original notes, Mills found a brief observation from Deputy Tommy Greer dated August 23, 1974. The note was almost an afterthought, scrolled in the margin of an interview summary. "Something off in Pastor Hale's eyes. Can't explain. Just a feeling." To Mills, this marginal note was potentially significant. It represented the gut instinct of an experienced investigator, the kind of intuition that often proved correct but couldn't be quantified or used as evidence. He created a separate document file titled, Hale, Raymond, Points of Interest, and entered this observation as the first item. He pinned a printed copy of the note to his investigation board, next to an enlarged version of the Polaroid showing the Nova abandoned by the river. Below both items, he wrote in marker, Hale, verify all connections to victim and crime scene. A week after submitting the samples, Mills received an email from the DNA lab with the subject line, Preliminary analysis complete, tissue samples viable. His hands were actually shaking slightly as he opened the attachment. The preliminary report was brief but promising. Handkerchief sample shows presence of mixed skin cell traces. Initial screening indicates multiple DNA sources present. Sufficient biological material recovered for complete genetic profiling. Y chromosome DNA detected, indicating male contributor. Hair sample shows intact follicle with nuclear DNA present. Full STR analysis proceeding. Mills read the email twice, then leaned back in his chair, his heart racing with a mixture of hope and professional excitement. He understood what this meant. After 48 years, they had biological evidence that could potentially be tested against modern DNA databases. If the male DNA from the handkerchief matched anyone in the system, anyone who had ever been arrested, served in the military, worked in certain government positions, or submitted DNA for any reason, they would have a suspect. That night, Mills stayed late at the office, the number 74 Caldwell box open on his desk. It now contained only empty evidence bags and the original reports, but to Mills it represented something far more significant. It was no longer just a forgotten relic from the past. It was the starting point of a new investigation, a chance to finally answer questions that had gone unanswered for nearly half a century. Outside his window, a warm Texas spring wind blew across the dry fields surrounding Waco, stirring up the distinctive red dust that seemed to coat everything in this part of the state. The dust clouded against the glass, obscuring his view. Mills lit a cigarette, a habit he tried to quit multiple times, and watched the smoke curl upward like fine thread disappearing into the air. He found himself thinking about Anna Caldwell, a girl he never met, who'd been dead or missing for longer than he'd been alive. She'd been 19 when she disappeared. Just 19. Barely an adult. Her whole life ahead of her. And for 48 years, no one had seriously investigated what happened to her. No one had demanded answers. No one had fought for justice on her behalf. Maybe this time, Mills said quietly to the empty room. Maybe this time you'll get to speak. Maybe this time we'll listen. 3 weeks after sending the samples to the DNA lab, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Mills was in the records room organizing files, his laptop pinged with an incoming email notification. The sound was soft, almost inaudible, but Mills heard it immediately and felt his pulse quicken. He walked quickly to his desk and opened his email. The subject line made his breath catch. DPS Crime Lab, DNA results final report ready for review. His hand actually trembled slightly as he clicked to open the attachment. The report was 3 pages long, dense with technical terminology and genetic markers, but Mills had reviewed enough DNA reports during his career to understand the key sections immediately. He scrolled to the summary conclusions on page 1, and his heart began to pound so hard he could feel it in his throat. The first lines were clear and unambiguous. Biological sample recovered from white handkerchief, evidence item 01A, shows presence of 2 distinct DNA sources. Source 1 female, genetic profile consistent with victim Anna Marie Caldwell based on comparison with maternal DNA reference sample obtained from surviving relatives. Source 2 male, complete Y chromosome STR profile obtained. Male DNA profile entered into Cody's database for comparison. Match identified. Identity confirmed as Raymond James Hale, male, born March 14, 1948, current residence Temple, Texas. Match confidence, 99.99987%. Random match probability, 1 in 220 trillion. Mills sat back in his chair, completely silent, his mind reeling. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in as the full implications of what he was reading began to sink in. That name. Raymond Hale. The same name scrolled under the Polaroid photograph. The same pastor from Waco Baptist Church. The same volunteer who had participated in the search. The same man Deputy Tommy Greer had noted had something off in his eyes. And now, 48 years later, his DNA was on the missing girl's handkerchief. The handkerchief he himself claimed to have found by the river. The handkerchief that had Anna Caldwell's initials embroidered on it. Mills reread the conclusion section of the report, his heart tightening with each word. At the bottom of page 3 was a detailed verification section that explained the scientific methodology. Analysis performed using advanced STR amplification techniques and Cody's 2.0 comparison protocols. Multiple genetic markers confirmed across 15 independent loci. Quality control procedures followed per FBI Cody's standards. Random match probability calculated using standard population genetics models. Conclusion: the male DNA recovered from evidence item 01A is, to a scientific certainty, from Raymond James Hale. No possibility of laboratory error or contamination. Results verified by independent secondary analysis. There was absolutely no room for doubt. No possibility of mistake. No chance this was coincidence or contamination. Raymond Hale's DNA was on that handkerchief, and the scientific certainty was absolute. That afternoon, Mills drove the hour and a half to Austin to meet personally with the lab technician, Laura Chin, at the crime lab facility. She led him through the secure corridors to the sample storage area, a room kept at precisely controlled temperature and humidity levels. She showed him 2 small vials, each containing biological samples preserved in liquid nitrogen. "I double-checked everything personally," Laura said, her voice firm and professional. "I ran the analysis twice using independent samples. I had a colleague verify my results without telling him what case this was related to. The results are absolutely solid. There is no system error, no contamination, no mistake of any kind." Mills asked the critical question, the one any defense attorney would immediately raise. "Is there any possibility of contamination? Could his DNA have gotten on the handkerchief some other way? Maybe someone else touched it during the investigation?" Laura shook her head decisively. "No. The DNA concentration is too high for casual contact. This isn't a touch DNA situation where someone briefly handled the item. The genetic material is primarily concentrated on the inner surface of the handkerchief, the part that would make direct contact with skin if you were gripping it tightly or wiping your hands with it. The DNA profile shows evidence of prolonged contact, meaning he held this item for an extended period, not just touched it briefly." On the long drive back to Waco, a rare Texas drizzle began to fall, the first real rain in weeks. Mills turned on the radio but heard only static, so he turned it off and drove in silence. His windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, and his mind raced through the implications of what he'd learned. If Hale was the perpetrator, if he had done something to Anna Caldwell and then participated in the search for her, it would explain so many anomalies in the original case file. It would explain why he was at the scene so early, before the official search even began. It would explain why he knew exactly where to find the handkerchief. It would explain the feeling Deputy Greer had described, that sense that something was fundamentally wrong about Hale's demeanor. But it also raised terrifying questions. Why would a pastor, a respected member of the community, someone trusted to work with children and counsel the faithful, harm a 19-year-old girl? Was this a crime of opportunity, or had he been targeting Anna specifically? And most chilling of all, if he had gotten away with this crime for 48 years, had there been others? Back at his office in Bell County, Mills immediately updated the digital case file. Under the suspect section, he entered the first name that had been placed there in 48 years. Hale, Raymond James. Age 74. Current residence, 123 Willow Creek Drive, Temple, Texas. DNA match confirmed on primary evidence item. Suspect classification: primary person of interest in disappearance and suspected homicide of Anna Caldwell. That night, Mills stayed at the office until well past midnight. The old case reports were spread across his desk, illuminated by the harsh glow of his laptop screen. Beside them sat the enlarged and digitally enhanced Polaroid photograph from 1974 showing Raymond Hale, then 26 years old, standing by the Bosque River. Mills used sophisticated image enhancement software to enlarge and adjust the contrast and brightness of the photograph. Under the artificial enhancement, details emerged that would have been completely invisible in the original Polaroid. Hale's face became clearer, the features more distinct. He could see the deep-set eyes, the lips pressed tightly together in something that wasn't quite a smile. And most notably, the direction of Hale's gaze. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking elsewhere, off to the side, towards something outside the frame. His expression was calm, almost serene, but there was something in those eyes, something that sent a genuine chill down Mills' spine even through a 48-year-old photograph. The next morning, Mills presented his preliminary findings to the Texas Cold Case Review Board in a closed-door meeting. 4 senior investigators attended, along with an assistant district attorney from Bell County who would need to evaluate whether they had sufficient grounds for prosecution. When Mills displayed the DNA results on the conference room screen, the room fell into complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Finally, one of the senior investigators, Captain Rodriguez, spoke quietly. "We're talking about a former pastor," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "A man who was respected in his community, who volunteered to help search for this girl. Is that correct?" Mills nodded, keeping his own voice level and professional. "Yes, sir. Raymond Hale served at Waco Baptist Church from 1969 to 1984. He then moved to Temple, where he retired from ministry in 1985 at age 37, citing health reasons. He currently lives in Temple with his wife and granddaughter. According to all records, he has lived a completely quiet, law-abiding life for the past 48 years. He paused, letting that information sink in, then continued. But his DNA is on evidence from the 1974 disappearance scene. That's not speculation. That's not circumstantial. That's scientific fact with a certainty of 99.99987%. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, staring at the DNA report projected on the screen. Do we have legal grounds for arrest and prosecution? The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Patricia Valdez, spoke up. Not yet. DNA on a handkerchief proves contact, but it doesn't prove murder. We need more. We need to establish opportunity, means, and ideally motive. We need to place him with the victim at the critical time. We need to show consciousness of guilt. Right now, all we have is DNA that could potentially be explained away. Mills had anticipated this. I've requested a warrant for a confirmation DNA sample and a search warrant for his current residence. If we can find anything, photographs, mementos, journals, anything that connects him to Anna Caldwell beyond what he's already admitted, we strengthen the case significantly. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Do it. Get your warrants. But do this right. If this man has been walking free for 48 years, I want to make sure when we move on him, it sticks. Information on Raymond Hale. The duty officer checked the department's database and called back within the hour. He's still at the Willow Creek address, the officer reported. 74 years old, in apparently good health according to his driver's license renewal medical exam. No criminal record of any kind. Not even a parking ticket. He's an honorary pastor at a small community church on Rushing Avenue. Teaches Bible study on Wednesday evenings. By all accounts, he's a model citizen. Mills thanked him and hung up, a chill running down his spine. A model citizen. A respected member of the community. Someone no one would ever suspect. That was often the most dangerous type of criminal, the kind who could hide in plain sight for decades. That evening, driven by a need to see the suspect with his own eyes, Mills made the decision to drive to Temple. He told himself it was reconnaissance, getting a feel for the neighborhood, understanding the suspect's current life circumstances. But truthfully, he needed to see the man who had potentially gotten away with murder for 48 years. He arrived at Willow Creek Drive just as the sun was setting, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet and well-maintained, with modest single-story homes, neatly trimmed lawns, and flowers planted in careful rows. The house at number 123 was painted a cheerful light blue, with white trim and a covered porch. Mills parked his unmarked car half a block away and watched. Through the front window, warm yellow light spilled out into the gathering dusk. On the porch, moving slowly and carefully, was an elderly man with silver-white hair. Raymond Hale himself. He was watering the hanging flower baskets, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He wore casual clothes, khaki pants and a light cardigan sweater despite the warm evening. His movements showed a slight limp in his left leg, but he appeared generally fit and healthy for a man of 74. The man who once stood before congregations of hundreds was now this quiet figure in a small neighborhood, living out his retirement in peaceful obscurity. To anyone watching, he would seem completely ordinary. A grandfather? A retiree? Someone who'd lived a good life and was enjoying his golden years. But Mills knew what the DNA results showed. He knew this man's genetic material was on a handkerchief belonging to a girl who had disappeared 48 years ago and never been found. Mills sat in his car for nearly an hour, taking notes on everything he observed. Subject appears calm, no signs of stress or awareness of investigation. Slight limp left leg, but otherwise mobile and active. House well maintained. No visible security systems or cameras. Neighbors appear to have normal friendly relationship with subject. One elderly woman waved to him from across the street. As darkness fell completely and the porch light came on, Mills started his car and drove back to Waco. The entire drive, he couldn't shake the image of that elderly man peacefully watering his flowers, living a quiet, normal life while somewhere, Anna Caldwell's remains lay undiscovered, her family denied closure for nearly 5 decades. Back at his office, Mills added a detailed report to the growing digital file. Subject Raymond Hale observed at current residence Temple, Texas. DNA evidence conclusively links subject to victim's personal effects. Recommend immediate pursuit of search warrant for subject's residence and confirmation DNA sample. Recommend investigation into subject's activities and movements during period 1974 to present, with particular focus on any additional missing person cases or unsolved disappearances in areas where subject resided. The file now ran to over 200 pages of documentation, DNA reports, enhanced photographs, timeline analyses, and investigative notes. Mills added one more entry before closing his laptop for the night. Case status: active investigation. Primary suspect identified. DNA evidence confirmed. Proceeding to evidence collection phase and preparation for arrest warrant. Subject Raymond Hale is not aware of investigation at this time. Extreme caution advised to preserve prosecutorial integrity. Mills woke at 5 the next morning, unable to sleep, his mind consumed by one persistent thought that had been nagging at him since he first examined the evidence. The Polaroid photograph. He'd studied it dozens of times over the previous weeks, but something about it continued to bother him, something just beyond the edge of his conscious understanding. He arrived at the office before sunrise and immediately pulled up the high-resolution scan of the photograph on his computer. It showed the initial search team standing by the Bosque River on that August morning in 1974. The image was grainy and poorly lit, typical of amateur photography from that era. But modern digital enhancement technology could work miracles with old photographs, pulling details out of shadows and grain that would have been completely invisible to the naked eye in 1974. Mills used specialized infrared enhancement software to process the image, a technique that could reveal details based on heat signatures and light reflection patterns that weren't visible in normal photography. He increased the contrast by 400%, adjusted the brightness levels, and applied multiple filtering algorithms designed to sharpen edges and enhance fine details. When the enhanced image finally loaded on his screen after nearly 20 minutes of processing, Mills felt his breath catch in his throat. In the newly clarified frame, Raymond Hale stood at an angle, his body positioned as if he was almost touching the roof of the yellow Nova. The morning light, and this was the critical detail, glinted off something on his right wrist. A shiny metal object. A watch. Round face, silver band, clearly visible in the enhanced image. Mills stared at the screen, his heart beginning to race. He had seen that watch before. Just a few nights ago, when he'd been observing Hale watering his flowers in Temple. The 74-year-old man had been wearing a watch. A distinctive silver watch with a round face and mesh band. Mills quickly pulled up the notes he'd taken during his surveillance, along with the photographs he'd discreetly taken from his car. He zoomed in on one image showing Hale's wrist as he reached up to water a hanging basket. There it was. A silver watch. Round face. Mesh band. And Mills enhanced the image further, a small scratch on the outer edge of the bezel. He pulled the 1974 Polaroid back up and zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow on Hale's wrist in that old photograph. The watch had a white face, 2 short hands clearly visible, the distinctive mesh band, and yes, even in this 48-year-old photograph, there appeared to be a small imperfection or scratch on the edge of the bezel. Same position. Same shape. Mills sat back, his mind reeling with the implications. Hale was still wearing the same watch he'd worn in 1974. A watch he'd been wearing the morning Anna Caldwell's car was discovered. A watch that now definitively placed him at that crime scene on that specific morning. But the revelation went deeper than that. Mills checked the metadata on the Polaroid scan, then cross-referenced it with weather data from Waco in August of 1974 that he'd requested from the National Weather Service archives. The shadow angles in the photograph told a precise story. The shadows in the image leaned distinctly westward, which meant the sun was rising from the southeast. Mills consulted astronomical tables for the exact sunrise time on August 20, 1974 in Waco, Texas. Sunrise had occurred at 6:42 a.m. Given the angle and length of the shadows in the photograph, and accounting for the position of the sun approximately 30 to 45 minutes after sunrise, the photograph had been taken between 6:40 and 6:50 a.m. Mills pulled up Sheriff Ford's original report and found the relevant timeline entry. The official record stated that the first search team reached the Bosque Bridge area at 8:15 a.m. on August 20th. He did the math again, double-checking his calculations. The photograph was taken at approximately 6:45 a.m. The official search began at 8:15 a.m. That was a gap of 90 minutes. An hour and a half. Raymond Hale had been at the crime scene at least an hour and a half before the police arrived. Mills immediately wrote in his investigation log, "Critical timeline discrepancy identified. Enhanced photograph analysis confirms subject Hale present at crime scene approximately 06:45 hours, August 20, 1974. Official police arrival time, 08:15 hours. Gap of 90 minutes unexplained." He pulled up Hale's original statement from the 1974 investigation. In his interview with Sheriff Ford, Hale had claimed he joined the search around 9 o'clock in the morning, after being called by church members who had heard about Anna's disappearance. He claimed he drove directly from his home to the search area. But the photograph proved that was a lie. He'd been there much earlier. Before the police. Before the official search. Possibly right after the Nova was abandoned. Mills picked up his phone and called the Waco Tribune-Herald, asking to speak with someone in their archives department. An older staff member named Henry Patterson answered, his voice gravelly with age. "I'm investigating a cold case from 1974. Mills explained. "The Anna Caldwell disappearance. I'm looking for any original photographs your paper might have taken during the search effort." Patterson was quiet for a moment, then said, "Caldwell. Yeah, I remember that case. I was just a junior photographer back then. Let me check our archives. We kept all the old film negatives from that era. Give me a day or two." The next afternoon, Patterson called back, his voice excited. "Found them. We have several rolls of 35mm film from the Bosque Bridge search. The photographer was Ray Bowers. He's deceased now, passed away in 2010. But his negatives are all here, properly archived. Can you scan them for me?" Mills asked. "Already did," Patterson replied. "Sending them to your email now. There's one frame in particular you should look at. It matches that Polaroid you mentioned, but it's shot from a different angle. Shows more of the scene." Mills opened his email and downloaded the scanned negatives. When he opened the file Patterson had flagged, his breath caught. It was the same scene as the Polaroid, the yellow Nova, the search volunteers, the Bosque River in the background. But this photograph was taken from a slightly different position, showing more context. Most critically, there were no police barriers visible. No crime scene tape. No official police vehicles. The scene was completely uncontrolled, suggesting it had been photographed before law enforcement had secured the area. In the foreground, Raymond Hale's figure was clearly visible, pointing toward the river. His posture was tense, almost commanding, as if he was giving instructions or directing attention to something. At his feet, clearly visible in the mud, was what appeared to be a drag mark, as if something heavy had been pulled or a vehicle had made a sudden swerving stop. Mills used the same shadow analysis technique on this photograph. The results were identical. The image had been taken between 6:40 and 6:50 a.m., more than 90 minutes before the official police arrival. He immediately began a detailed comparative analysis, placing the Polaroid and the newspaper negatives side by side on his dual monitors. Using photogrammetric software, he aligned the images based on fixed reference points, the bridge supports, specific trees, rock formations along the riverbank. The shadow positions matched perfectly, confirming that both photographs had been taken within minutes of each other, both in that crucial window between 6:40 and 6:50 a.m. Mills compiled all of this analysis into a comprehensive report with detailed diagrams, shadow angle calculations, and photographic comparisons. He uploaded it to the case file with a summary conclusion. Digital image analysis conclusively confirms subject Raymond Hale present at crime scene before 0700 hours on August 20, 1974. This is approximately 90 minutes before Sheriff Ford and official search team arrived at 0815 hours. Polaroid evidence proves direct contact with or immediate proximity to victim's vehicle before official discovery. Silver watch detail in 1974 photograph matches watch currently worn by subject, confirming continuity and providing additional verification of subject's identity. When Captain Rodriguez reviewed the report later that day, he called Mills immediately. "This is solid work. This is exactly what we needed. You've got visual proof that he was lying about when he arrived at the scene. You've got him at the location before anyone should have known there was a problem. There's more," Mills said. "I want to compare this Polaroid with the watch Hale is wearing today. If it's the same watch after 48 years, it means he's kept it, possibly as a trophy. That shows a psychological connection to the crime." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Get your search warrant. Find that watch. And find anything else he might have kept from that day." Mills pulled up the enhanced image of Hale one more time, zooming in on his face in that 48-year-old photograph. The calm expression. The slight, barely noticeable curve at the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. An expression of someone who knew exactly what was in front of the camera and what was beyond its frame. An expression of someone who was confident he would never be caught. Below the photograph, Mills noticed for the first time a detail he'd previously overlooked. At the very bottom of the Polaroid, almost cut off by the edge of the frame, was a caption in faded ink written by whoever had developed the photo. "Volunteer Pastor RH assists in search efforts." Mills stared at those words for a long time. Assists in search efforts. The bitter irony was almost overwhelming. The man wasn't assisting in the search. He was monitoring it. Making sure nothing was found. Making sure the investigation went in the wrong direction. Mills added one final note to his report, typing slowly and deliberately. Subject Hale present at crime scene before official police discovery. Photographic evidence conclusively demonstrates subject lied in original statement regarding time of arrival and knowledge of crime scene. This is not a missing person case. This is a homicide investigation. Suspect, Raymond James Hale. The next morning, as Texas's first sunlight crept through the office windows, Aaron Mills sat at his desk and began drafting the most important document of the investigation, a comprehensive affidavit supporting a request for search and arrest warrants. He had spent the previous evening organizing every piece of evidence, every timeline discrepancy, every forensic finding into a coherent narrative that would convince a judge that probable cause existed. The affidavit began with a detailed reconstruction of the timeline of August 19, 1974. Mills had spent weeks piecing together every movement, every reported sighting, every documented event from that critical day. According to church records that Mills had obtained from the Waco Baptist Church archives, choir practice on Monday, August 19, had been scheduled from 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m., led by Assistant Pastor Raymond Hale. This detail was confirmed by the church bulletin from that week, which Mills had found carefully preserved in the diocesan historical archives. But in his original statement to Sheriff Ford, Hale had claimed he left the church at 8 o'clock p.m., went straight home to his residence in Temple, approximately 35 miles away, and remained there all evening. He claimed he didn't learn about Anna's disappearance until the following morning when church members called him. Mills had tracked down Eleanor Wood, the choir director from that time period, now 83 years old and living in Abilene. Despite her age, her memory of that evening was remarkably clear, perhaps because of what came after. "I remember that practice very clearly," she had told Mills over the phone, her voice trembling but steady. "It was brutally hot, even in the evening. Must have been in the high 90s. Raymond, Pastor Hale, ended the practice early, around 7:30. He seemed distracted, kept looking at his watch. He said he had urgent pastoral business outside town and needed to leave. I remember thinking it was unusual because he didn't say what the business was, and he usually told me these things since I was the director." "Did he say where he was going?" Mills had asked. "No," she had replied. He just grabbed his leather briefcase. I remember he always carried this old brown leather briefcase, and left through the south gate of the church. I watched him walk to his car. He seemed to be in a hurry. Mills had documented her statement meticulously, recording the phone call with her permission. Now, as he drafted the affidavit, he incorporated this timeline. 7:30 p.m. Hale leaves Waco Baptist Church, claiming urgent business. 7:40 p.m. Anna Caldwell leaves Bright Stitch Tailor Shop. 7:52 p.m. Anna stops at Gulf Station, last confirmed sighting. Male figure in blue shirt observed near her vehicle. 8:10 to 8:20 p.m. Estimated time Anna's vehicle arrives at Bosque Bridge based on farmer sightings of car lights. Mills opened a 1974 road map of Waco, spreading it across his desk. Using a ruler, he drew a line from Waco Baptist Church to the Gulf Station on Highway 84. The distance was approximately 5 miles. Travel time by car, 10 to 12 minutes in normal traffic, possibly less late in the evening when roads were empty. If Hale had left the church at 7:30 p.m., driving toward Highway 84, he could easily have reached the Gulf Station area by 7:40 to 7:45. Right when Anna was there. Right when the mysterious man in the blue shirt was observed standing near her car. Mills wrote in the affidavit. Subject Hale's documented departure from Waco Baptist Church at 19:30 hours places him in geographic and temporal proximity to victim's last known location. Travel time analysis demonstrates subject could have encountered victim at Gulf Station approximately 1945 hours. This represents a critical 25-minute window during which subject's whereabouts are completely unaccounted for. The 25-minute window. From 7:30 when Hale left the church to 7:55 when Anna was last seen leaving the Gulf Station with an unknown male. 25 minutes during which anything could have happened. 25 minutes that could explain everything. Mills next addressed the physical evidence, the DNA results that had started this entire reinvestigation. He attached the complete laboratory report as Exhibit A to the affidavit, highlighting the key conclusions. Male DNA recovered from handkerchief, evidence item 01A, matches subject Raymond James Hale with 99.99987% certainty. DNA concentration and distribution patterns consistent with prolonged direct contact, not casual or incidental touching. Subject's genetic material present on inner surface of fabric, indicating subject gripped or held item for extended period. Then came the photographic evidence, the Polaroid that had waited 48 years to reveal its secrets. Mills attached both the original image and the enhanced versions, along with detailed technical analysis of shadow angles, timing calculations, and comparative studies with the newspaper photographs. Enhanced photographic analysis conclusively demonstrates subject Hale present at crime scene approximately 06:45 hours, August 20, 1974, 90 minutes prior to official police arrival at 08:15 hours. Subject's presence at this early hour unexplained and contradicts his sworn statement that he arrived at approximately 0900 hours after being contacted by church members. Mills included a detailed section on Hale's false statements. In law enforcement, lies told by a suspect about their involvement in a crime are considered evidence of consciousness of guilt, an awareness that their true actions would incriminate them. Hale had lied about what time he left the church. He had lied about going straight home. He had lied about when he arrived at the search scene. These weren't minor discrepancies or honest mistakes of memory. These were specific, deliberate falsehoods designed to distance himself from the crime. The affidavit concluded with a clear request. Based on the foregoing evidence, there exists probable cause to believe that Raymond James Hale committed the offense of murder in the death of Anna Marie Caldwell on or about August 19, 1974. Request is hereby made for 1. Search warrant for the residence of Raymond James Hale at 123 Willow Creek Drive, Temple, Texas, for the purpose of recovering evidence including but not limited to silver wristwatch matching description in 1974 photograph, personal journals or diaries, photographs of victim, any items belonging to victim, and any other evidence related to the disappearance and suspected murder of Anna Marie Caldwell. 2. Warrant for collection of buccal swab DNA sample from Raymond James Hale for confirmation comparison with evidence DNA profile. 3. Arrest warrant for Raymond James Hale for the offense of murder in the first degree. Mills printed the 32-page affidavit, attached all exhibits, and hand-delivered it to Judge Margaret Thornton at the Bell County Courthouse that afternoon. Judge Thornton, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for thoroughness and no-nonsense jurisprudence, read through the entire document, while Mills waited in her chambers. After nearly 45 minutes, she looked up, removing her reading glasses. "This is extraordinary work, Detective Mills. The DNA evidence alone would be sufficient for the DNA warrant, but you've built a comprehensive case here. The timeline analysis, the photographic evidence, the false statements, it all points in one direction." She signed all 3 warrants, dating them and adding her official seal. "Execute these carefully. If this man has been free for 48 years, let's make sure we do this right. I don't want any procedural errors that could compromise the prosecution." Mills thanked her and left with the signed warrants in a sealed envelope, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline and the weight of what was about to happen. 3 days later, just after dawn on a cool Thursday morning, 4 unmarked police vehicles pulled quietly onto Willow Creek Drive in Temple. The sky was still gray with pre-dawn light, the streets silent except for the distant sound of a dog barking. Mills was in the lead vehicle with Lieutenant Chris Porter from the Temple Police Department, and 2 evidence technicians from the State Forensic Unit. They had deliberately chosen this early hour to minimize neighborhood disruption and to catch Hale before he might leave the house for his morning routine. According to surveillance conducted over the previous 2 days, Hale typically went for a walk at 7:30 each morning, then returned home for breakfast. At 6:45 a.m., Mills approached the front door, warrant in hand. He could see yellow light glowing from inside through the front windows. Someone was awake. He knocked firmly on the door, 3 measured knocks that echoed in the quiet morning. The door opened after his second series of knocks. Raymond Hale stood there, exactly as Mills had seen him through his surveillance. Silver-white hair neatly combed despite the early hour. He was already dressed in khaki pants and a light blue button-down shirt. Sharp eyes that showed only mild surprise, not alarm. A faint, polite smile. "Yes? Can I help you, gentlemen?" His voice was slightly raspy with age, but calm, controlled. Mills held up his identification and the warrant. "Mr. Hale, I'm Detective Aaron Mills with the Texas Cold Case Review Unit. We have a search warrant for your residence and a warrant to collect a DNA sample from you, both related to the 1974 disappearance of Anna Caldwell." For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Hale's eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition. A momentary crack in the calm facade. Then it was gone, replaced by that same polite expression. "Anna Caldwell," he said softly, almost to himself. "Oh, that poor girl. That was so long ago." He stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "Of course, come in. Though I must tell you, I don't remember much about that time. It was nearly 50 years ago." The house was eerily tidy, almost obsessively organized. Bibles stacked in perfect alignment on built-in shelves. Family photographs arranged in chronological order on the mantel. A ticking grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swinging with metronomic precision. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. Mills directed the team to split up. "One group upstairs, bedrooms and attic. Porter, you and I will take the basement. Technicians, start with the study and any personal storage areas." Hale nodded cooperatively. "The basement is through the kitchen. There's a door behind the wooden cabinet." Then, with an odd smile, "I'm afraid I don't have the key. I haven't been down there in years. My knee, you know." Lieutenant Porter examined the basement door. It was indeed behind a tall wooden cabinet that had clearly been positioned deliberately to obscure it. The door had an old iron bolt lock. When Porter tugged on it experimentally, it opened easily despite Hale's claim that it was locked. "No key needed," Porter said quietly to Mills. A musty smell immediately wafted up from the darkness below, the scent of rust, rotting wood, and something else. Something that made Mills' investigator instincts immediately sharpen. Mills descended the wooden stairs slowly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Porter followed, and behind them came one of the forensic technicians with additional lighting equipment. The basement was unfinished, with exposed pipes and concrete walls. But in the far corner, illuminated by Mill's flashlight, was something that made his blood run cold. A workbench. Old and worn, but meticulously organized. Tools hung in perfect rows on a pegboard. And on the bench itself, carefully arranged like museum pieces, were items that had no innocent explanation for being there. A woman's silver charm bracelet, tarnished with age. A small spiral notebook with a floral cover, the pages yellowed. A driver's license in a plastic sleeve, the photograph faded but still visible. A young woman with dark wavy hair, smiling. And there, sitting in a small wooden box like a trophy, was a silver watch with a round face and mesh band. The same watch from the photograph. The same watch Hale had been wearing just days ago. Mills felt his heart pounding as he carefully photographed each item before touching anything. The technician immediately began documenting the scene, taking hundreds of photographs from every angle. Mills carefully picked up the driver's license using gloved hands. Even through the yellowed plastic, he could read the name clearly. Anna Caldwell. Date of birth, March 11, 1955. Issue date, April 1973. She had been 19 when this license was issued. 19 when she disappeared. Her whole life ahead of her. This is where our story reaches its conclusion. After 48 years of silence, after decades of a killer walking free, the truth finally emerged from that basement in Temple, Texas. The items Mills found that morning would prove beyond any doubt what had happened to Anna Caldwell. Raymond Hale was arrested that day and charged with first-degree murder. He never confessed, maintaining to the end that he didn't remember anything about that night. But the evidence spoke for him. The DNA. The photographs. The timeline. And most damningly, the trophies he'd kept hidden in his basement for nearly half a century. Physical proof that he had taken Anna Caldwell's life and then spent 48 years living freely while her family waited for answers that never came. Ruth Caldwell never got to see justice for her daughter. She passed away in 1981, still waiting, still hoping. But her surviving relatives, Anna's cousins, nieces and nephews who never knew her but grew up hearing her story, finally got the closure that had been denied for so long. The trial took place in the fall of 2022. Raymond Hale, now 75 years old, sat silently through the proceedings as forensic experts explained the DNA evidence, as detectives described the timeline discrepancies, as prosecutors showed the jury photographs of the items found in his basement. The silver watch. The driver's license. The personal effects of a girl who disappeared in 1974. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Hale was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died 16 months later in a Texas state prison medical facility, taking whatever final secrets he still held to his grave. He never revealed where he had hidden Anna's remains, and despite extensive searches of properties he'd owned or had access to over the years, her body has never been recovered. But the case was solved. The question that had haunted Waco for 48 years finally had an answer. And it all came down to a detail in a Polaroid photograph that no one had noticed in 1974 but that modern technology finally revealed: a silver watch on a killer's wrist, worn with such confidence that he never imagined it would one day help prove his guilt. This case reminds us that justice, though sometimes delayed for decades, can still be served. That evidence preserved, even imperfectly, can still speak across the years. And that investigators who refuse to let cold cases stay cold can bring answers to families who never stopped hoping. Anna Caldwell was 19 years old when her life was taken from her on a hot August night in 1974. Her story deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a daughter, a friend, a young woman with dreams and potential that were stolen from her. And her case serves as a testament to the investigators like Aaron Mills who believe that every victim, no matter how long ago they were taken, deserves justice. If this story moved you, if you believe in the importance of never giving up on cold cases and giving families the closure they deserve, please hit that subscribe button for 72-hour true crime. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this case and on the importance of modern forensic science in solving decades-old mysteries. And hit that like button to help this story reach others who care about justice for forgotten victims. Thank you for staying with me through this journey into one of Texas's most haunting cold cases. This has been 72-Hour True Crime, and until next time, remember that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light.